All right, here we go. Chapter 9, Unit 4. How does the structure of neurons help with its function? So this is Unit 4. We divide the nervous system into two parts. We'll talk about the nerves themselves, brain, spinal cord, and then periphery. And then we'll talk about the next unit. We'll talk about the brain specifically. So that's going to be the way that this is broken out. Usually, when we're in class, it's usually like A and B, one whole unit, but we divide it into two still. So shorter test, not so long as far as the amount of or depth of information. All right. So what are the functions of the nervous system? Just like anything else, we start off with functions versus anatomy, and how um, the structure of a particular uh, organ, cell, whatever, has an influence on its function. So these are the functions of the nervous system: feeling, thinking, remembering, moving, awareness, coordinating, homeostasis, and the communication between the brain and the body. Right? So it's pretty I think we have an idea of all the things that it's capable of doing. All right, so the nervous system we break into two sections. We have the central nervous system, what we abbreviate CNS. That's composed of the brain and the spinal cord. And then we'll have the peripheral nervous system, which is everything else other than the brain and the spinal cord. So the nerves in the body, right? So the periphery. So we divide those up into sensory, the senses, the ones that are responsible for any change in the environment, right? Eyes, seeing, hearing, feeling, touching, um, those types of things. And then the motor neurons, which are the effectors, right? The ones that are going to be responsible for any reaction based on the sensory nerves. And so those can be both, just like the muscles, both voluntary and involuntary. All right, so we have the neuroglia, which is we have two different types of cells. Oh, sorry, sort of skipped a slide. I knew that I did. So there's two different types of cells within the nervous system. We have the neurons, which everybody is familiar with, the ones that are responsible for transmitting signals from one part of the body to the other. But we also have these support cells called neuroglia, which not only provide support, but they allow the nutrients to get to the nerve cells, and they actually are responsible for forming the insulation that helps with the conduction of the electrical signal down the nerve cell. And we'll learn more about that later. All right, oops. So we have two different types of, and these are just called glia cells or glial cells, GALIAL. That's usually how they're referred to if you look them up. So we have the oligodendrocytes, which are the cells that form the myelin sheath around in the brain and the spinal cord. So those are the specific glial cells that form the myelin sheath, and we'll learn where the myelin sheath is. You can see it's this green area here, just in the brain and the spinal cord. And then we have the Schwann cells that are responsible for forming the myelin sheath in the peripheral nervous system. And you might be familiar with this name. It's the same guy, old white scientist that um, from the cell theory, was one of the first ones to use a microscope and develop animal cell, called the animal cells, I think animalcules. If I might be mistaken, because it's a while since I saw that cell theory video. If you remember that from your freshman year. So anyway, these are both called glial cells or neuroglia, whichever. You most likely will see the glia or glial cells if you look these up. So these are the two different types. All right, so next we have, sorry, I'm just using my mouse and it's so sensitive. Okay, so the nerves, right? Sorry about that. So, it's sort of similar to the muscle, right? So it's not, like you have this nerve is made up of a whole bunch of different nerve cells, right? And you still have like the fascicle, right? Or the fascia, the same type of thing, the separating structure that separates a nerve cell from the other nerve cell, right? And then the whole big bundle of it, and you'll have your glial cells within this, right, for support so they can form this myelin sheath. So, and then you can see the blood and because the blood and the blood vessels, because we still need to get nutrients to the nerve cell. Like we said, it provides nutrients. So a cell has a nucleus and has other organelles within it. So it still needs to get it still needs sodium and potassium and other nutrients to get to it. So, that's why we see the blood vessels there. And then, we have different parts, and you certainly don't need to know the different parts. I think the big thing that you need to understand is that, a nerve is made up of a bunch of nerve cells, and they can be neurons or the glial cells, as I mentioned. All right, so here's a basic neuron, the anatomy, and I think we have a picture of this. I don't have my packet, but this is going to be, identification, obviously. Our EQ1, we will have an EQ1 quiz, and identification will be part of it. So we have the dendrites, the receptors of the nerve cell. So those are going to be receiving either from the central nervous system, or they will be receiving a signal from another nerve cell. So that's where the signal comes in. And then we do have the cell body, which does contain the nucleus and all other parts of the cell that's needed. And then we have the axon, where the signal is going to travel down, and these terminal ends of the axon is going to either be synapsed with another nerve, or, as we saw in the muscle, that neuromuscular junction, to where it would, send that acetylcholine. And remember, we talked about the acetylcholine being at the end of these, and that would be, either to another dendrite of another cell, neuron, or the muscle cell, right? And then these yellow parts that we're going to learn about, this is a myelin sheath, right? We talked about how the Schwann cells develop this. So we know that this would be a part of the peripheral nervous system because it has a myelin. Actually, we don't, obviously. I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I was thinking of Schwann cells. But anyway, so we don't know that it's. So anyway, you can see the myelin sheath that helps with conduction, right? And the gaps in between the myelin sheath, you can see these where there is no insulation. Those are called the nodes of Ranvier. So those would be those there, right? And the axon would be this part. All right, so there's 3 different neuron classifications, multipolar, and again, these are sort of self-describing, meaning that it has many dendrites, one axon, and this is what normally we see in our like peripheral nervous system, is these multi-dendrites and multipolar, where the bipolar would be mostly, and I don't want to say all, but mostly would be found in the central nervous system. So it has one axon, one dendrite. Unipolar neurons, we might have a few. I'd have to look it up. I keep on forgetting to look at this up, but mostly I know, like in insects, the smaller organisms have the unipolar neurons. I don't know how, we might have in the specific area a unipolar neuron, but couldn't be 100% sure. So we maybe have to look that up. And so, but I know, like, I remember like insects and things like that have the interpolar neurons. All right. Okay. So how are they? We talked about the sensory neurons and the motor neurons, but there's also interneurons. So interconnecting, right? So the sensory obviously are the ones located in the the receptor, right? So they're called afferent. And I'll tell you a little way of how I remember it. So it goes from the periphery neuron or nervous system to the sensory. So, and I mean the central. So that makes sense, right? So if you touch something, it's going to go from your periphery to your spinal cord, right? So that's sensory, right? Interneurons are located within the central nervous system. So those are the ones that are going to be transporting that information within your central nervous system between your spinal cord and your brain. And then the motor neurons are going to be efferent. And those are, again, going from your central nervous system to your periphery nervous system, right? So that sort of makes sense. So if you need to touch something and, is it a good feeling, not a good feeling, that's all, you're sensing it going up to your, afferent going from periphery to central. And then, okay, now I got to think about it with the inner neurons. And then what am I going to do about it? Am I going to move my hand? Am I going to leave it there? So that's my motor neurons going from the efferent central nervous system to periphery nervous system. And the way that I remember afferent versus efferent, and there might be a better way, but I think of it as A is always away. So I sort of think that it's opposite of the way that you should think it is. Like sensory, you would think away, meaning, going away from the CNS to the PNS, but I don't always know that it's backwards, right? Or you can think of maybe afferent as far as sensory, it's away from our body. I don't know. It's up to you on how you, I do silly things like that all the time to help me remember, because there's, all this crap going through my head, and I need easy ways to remember things. So I don't know if that works for you or not, but this is also will have an effect, right? So that's why it's called efference. So it's going to have an effect, so it's okay, what are we doing? Or it's so, and I don't know. All right, it's probably why it's called that anyway. All right, is that it? Oh no, okay, so yeah, we just have like one picture of the way the process diagrammed, right? So you have your sensory receptors, the dendrites of your sensory receptors traveling down the axon towards your central nervous system, right? So we have our central nervous system here with our interneurons, and they're transferring the information. And then, okay, so, all right, at some point we thought about what we're going to be doing. So we're going to be sending a signal back to our muscles. So again, we have dendrites here. We have this big long axon. I mean, it's, we do actually have a huge nerve. It's one of the largest cells in our body is a nerve cell that goes down our leg, the sciatic nerve. So that's one cell, one neuron, or one nerve. And then it goes to the effector, the muscle or the sand. So what is it going to have an effect on? The muscle or the gland, and then that's at the axon terminal. There you have it. Nice and easy notes. We'll continue working on these, and we shall, actually, I'm doing these on Wednesday night, so I'll see you tomorrow before you probably even watch these. All right.